Right, this video is about the idiographic and nomothetic approaches to psychological investigations. This is in Issues and Debates for AQA Psychology. And just to give you an idea in a nutshell before we go into detail, the difference between the two is the nomothetic approach takes huge samples of people, generates quantitative data, makes generalizations about laws of human behaviour. On the other hand, the idiographic approach studies individuals, looking for unique insight, what their subjective experience is. They generate qualitative data from things like case studies, and they make no effort to generalise to other people. So you can see those are the key differences between the two approaches before we start. Okay, so if we take a nomothetic approach to an investigation, these are the things we're going to try and do. We're going to try and produce a general law of human behaviour, and we're going to try and provide a benchmark for comparison of behaviour. The idea is that can then allow, if we can establish a law or a benchmark so that we can compare behaviour between people, it means you're able to predict or potentially control people's behaviour more in the future. It helps you to establish ways in which people are similar. You study thousands of people, so you end up with a really large data set. You're looking to generate quantitative data so you can do really clear comparisons between large groups of people in order to establish laws of human behaviour. You can do statistical analysis for significance and so on. So that's the idea behind the nomothetic approach. And examples of the nomothetic approach, we've got the behaviourist approach, Skinner's rats. He tested all of that on thousands of rats to find his results. But the biological approach, hundreds of people were brain scanned to make generalisations about localisation of function. In the cognitive approach, the memory models were established only after hundreds and thousands of people had been tested in lab conditions, and so the memory models could be generalised from these results. Ash and Milgram, their experiments on social influence, carried out on hundreds of people, trying to establish general laws of social influence and how they act on people. Psychopathology, the DSM-V, again produced, it's a generalisation of human behaviour that's used in order to produce diagnoses in individuals. Okay. Idiographic approach, on the other hand, then. This approach tries to look much more at the individual. It's not looking to make generalisations across big groups of people. It's aiming to really understand the richness of the human experience, to get insight into the different ways that people view the world, different subjective experiences, motivations. So the kinds of methods they use are case studies, unstructured interviews, self-report method, and all of that generates qualitative data. So you're trying to get detail about subjective experience of people and not worrying about how it compares to other people. Couple of examples: Freud, Little Hands, the case study that he did, although he did generalise from it, which is more of a nomothetic thing to do, but he tried to establish a law based on a case study, but it was a case study where he was trying to really understand the experience of an individual. Humanistic psychologists as well emphasise subjective experience of humans. Right, moving on to evaluation. The nomothetic approach has lots of good things about it. Scientific credibility. The whole establishing general laws of human behaviour is a key part of the scientific approach. The nomothetic approach is useful for predicting and measuring under controlled conditions. It produces really big data sets so that we can have really good, robust statistical testing to compare different populations really effectively. And it can establish norms of behaviour which are really useful for us in terms of understanding human behaviour and the laws which generally govern large numbers of people. Alright, on the other hand, the weaknesses of the nomothetic approach are that when you have lab experiments which produce quantitative data, you often end up ignoring the subjective experience of a situation or the subtleties of a situation. Different people may experience a lab experiment in different ways and yet still come out with the same result, so it can make the data a bit inaccurate and vague. It only gives a superficial understanding of any one person. We know that about quantitative data. And it overlooks the richness of people's experience. It's a reductionist approach because it's simplifying a complex behaviour down to one or two factors. It's a determinist approach because it's establishing a law of causality that says that that this particular situation, for example, will cause this kind of behaviour. Okay, if we evaluate the idiographic approach, the good points here are that it gives a more complete and holistic understanding of the individual. We can understand the individual as a whole, not just one small element of them that we've looked at in this lab experiment. You get a rich, detailed understanding of that person if you've done a case study on them. And it helps to counteract the problem that in psychology, the use of the scientific method and lab experiment and so on means that we often don't focus on the unique qualities of people. And so using an idiographic approach can get round that problem, can help to balance out that lack of focus. And Allport, when he was researching personality, said that we can only predict behaviour if we know a person as a person. So even if we've got a general law, we still can't predict someone's behaviour from that, really, not unless we properly know them as a person. So on the downside for the idiographic approach, it's unscientific, it's subjective and so on. It's time consuming, so if you think about doing a case study and getting all the detail out of that case study in comparison to, for example, giving out a questionnaire and giving that out to thousands of people and getting lots of data back, you just produce your questionnaire once and then it's done. Whereas with your case study or your unstructured interview, it's really time consuming, you only get one person's data and so on. You can't make predictions about behaviour, is the last point to make, so it's less useful. You really get to understand someone's subjective experience and behaviour, but you can't necessarily, as a result of that, make predictions about how they will then behave, despite what Allport says on the other side of the argument. So to conclude then, a really nice evaluation point here to make is that combining the two approaches is a really good thing for psychology. So our aims of science, of any science, is to describe, understand, predict and control whatever we're looking at. And these first 2 points, describing and understanding, really relate to the idiographic approach. If we can describe and understand human experience, that's what it's trying to do. And the last two really relate to the nomothetic approach. If we want to predict and control, we need to have laws in order to predict and control from. So the aim of modern psychology now is to provide rich, detailed descriptions of human behaviour as well as the explanations of human behaviour with laws. So they want to get both sides of that in. And Millen and Davis said we should start with a nomothetic approach. Once you've got laws established, you can focus on getting that more subjective, rich, detailed understanding of how the laws might apply, for example, in individual cases. And examples of where a combined approach has been used is the example that we mentioned earlier with Freud and Little Hans. It was an idiographic approach in the case study, but it was then generalised to a law, which is more of a nomothetic approach. And then psychopathology equally takes this same approach, use the DSM-V in order to make a diagnosis, which is the DSM-V has been produced after looking at thousands of different patients and generalising to a description of a mental illness. But then an idiographic approach is taken with the individual patient. You look at the individual patient in order to determine treatment and so on. So that's it.